And look, Caitlin Clark was electric in the first quarter. 18 points, but ended up with only 12 after that. Tessa Johnson, the freshman, she balled out, hit some huge threes, also played great defense. But Camila Cardoso, Iowa had no match for her. 15 points, 17 rebounds. They got so many second and third chance opportunities. And Raven Johnson, not shown here, but she played some of the best defense of her life against Caitlin Clark, making it extremely difficult. You can't stop her, but you can contain her. And South Carolina, they're undefeated, and they are the national champs. And for more, we bring in CBS Sports college basketball analyst Erica Ayala. And Erica, that first quarter, we knew South Carolina was going to respond, right? But Iowa looked amazing. And then that second half, particularly that third quarter, what did you see from South Carolina that allowed them just to be so dominant down the stretch and showing why they're perfection? They got perfect, undefeated.
Hey, Chris, I'm having a little trouble hearing you, but I can tell you that this is a fantastic game. It's been a fantastic really season for women's basketball. These two teams were the most talked about teams coming in to the season, and I think we saw why. But for South Carolina, for Dawn Staley to get it done, to complete the undefeated season against the team that booted them out of the Final Four last year, that's huge. We saw that once again, the bench was the difference for the South Carolina Gamecocks. They gave no bench points up to Iowa, and they were able to convert on their chances. That speaks to the depth. That speaks to the trust of the sometimes known as a daycare at South Carolina. But you can see that Malaysia Fulwiley, Tessa Johnson had a great night, and it was just a full effort here. I think Chloe Kitts also put in significant minutes to take advantage of the size that South Carolina had, and it was just a little bit too much for Iowa today.
I want to go back to Tessa Johnson and Malaysia Fulwiley because they really kept South Carolina in this game when things were going a little rough. Why do you think these freshmen were able to be so poised in a moment where a lot of people, they would cave under the pressure?
Well, I think it goes back to the theme of this South Carolina program for this year. It's love. And these freshmen came in, they knew that this was a program that is and remains at the top of the women's basketball table, and that they were given the keys right away. Even though it made Dawn Staley uncomfortable, I joked around about the daycare. She has said, and we have written about it over at CBSSports.com, that this team makes her uncomfortably comfortable, It comes down to just that trust, that belief, and each cog of the South Carolina wheel doing its part. And I think we saw that on display today.
Oh, yeah. It was a complete team effort, and that is something we've seen from day one in Paris against Notre Dame to now in the national championship game against Iowa. And another player who really showed out, Camila Cardoso. How much more? Yeah, go ahead. Just the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you. Absolutely. Camila Cardoso, again, that size matchup, we knew that that was something that South Carolina was going to want to exploit. Now, I don't know if the numbers are going to definitely explode off of the box score, but got significant stops at key opportune times. She was able to really dominate down low, and there just really wasn't an answer. I think Hannah Stolke did a decent job. She had a few blocks even on Cardoso, but ultimately, I think the reason that Cardoso stood out to me is because it could be a little taste of what her game could be like at the next level. We know that Cardoso is one of the players from South Carolina and from this championship game that is going to be moving on to the WNBA. But I think that you really have to look at Cardoso's game tonight as part of the full picture of what she's really done in the tournament. And she has been a mainstay for this team. She missed, obviously, that first round game. But ever since, Dawn Staley and her teammates, I talked to Raven Johnson in Albany, said that she's kind of the engine that goes for them. They want her and need her to be aggressive, and I think she was able to put that on display while also, as we already talked about, creating plenty of room and plenty of second chances for those other stars to shine.
And another star, not offensively, but more so on the defensive end, Raven Johnson. We all know what happened last year. Caitlin Clark waving her off, right? But then she made a huge steal late in that second quarter. Clark took her eye off the ball. Then Raven went down for the fast break layup. And she really just played some sensational defense. Why do you think she was so effective against one of the greatest offensive players we've seen in the women's game?
Well, in a manner of speaking, I think she took it personally. And I think more so to the point, Raven was very open with us in Albany that the more so the reaction on social media to Caitlin Clark in Iowa waving her off last year, that her perimeter shot, even really her mid-range shot, wasn't something that was a threat to them when they were playing defense, that she had to take some time to really reflect on that. The reactions had her wanting to maybe leave basketball, but instead of doing that, she leaned her team, she leaned on her coaching staff, including, of course, Dawn Staley, and she got back into the gym. We saw, especially in the Final Four, that they were able to, against NC State, that Raven Johnson was feeling more confident, more comfortable shooting the ball. And so to have a player like that come back, work on her game, and be ready and have the moment, as we talked about. I think Tarika, said it the other day, to get her clap back. That's huge. And that's a full circle moment for Raven Johnson, but it goes back to, again, this team is special. They've been saying it. Dawn Staley begrudgingly has said it, but this was a special South Carolina team. And I think they really showed what can happen when the whole team goes all in, you buy into the system, and the coaching staff trusts their athletes.
You know what's really impressive, Erica, about this South Carolina team? They lost all 5 starters from last year's team. They replaced, or new players come in, other players step into bigger roles. It put into perspective how amazing this season was for South Carolina, when a lot of people didn't expect them to be at this point, let alone be perfect.
I think what we're seeing, and as this graphic shows, you see that there are titans of women's basketball. UConn, Tennessee, Stanford, even Kim Mulkey at her time at Baylor, and now she's translated that over to LSU. But what we now know for a fact is that Dawn Staley has built something special in South Carolina. We saw her very emotional immediately following the game, couldn't even really put into words. She has talked again, and I've mentioned it a few times, but I think it's worth noting. This is someone as a player, who's been to a championship game a handful of times at Virginia. This is someone who has played in the ABL, played in the WNBA, is an Olympic gold medalist, and has coached USA basketball at the highest level. And this team was able to rattle her and get her out of her comfort zone. For someone with that resume to still trust her players is amazing. To trust her coaching staff is phenomenal. And I think that speaks to the legacy of Dawn Staley and why South Carolina has become a place where players want to be able to, in some cases, like Pow Pow, in some cases come to revive what has been maybe a stalled start for them. And for young players, we talked about Tessa. Yep. We talked about Malaysia. To come in and build in that pipeline is huge.
Yeah, and so you only know next year they're going to be even more loaded. I know they lose Cardoso, but this team, they're going to be one of the best teams in the nation for sure. Now, on the other side, Caitlin Clark's decorated career comes to a sad end. 30 points, but late in that game, you just felt like her legs were really tired. What will you remember the most about Caitlin Clark and what she's done for women's basketball? Because she has become one of the biggest faces in the game.
A lot of people, including women's basketball players that are in the WNBA now, questioning, does she need to win a title to be one of the greatest of all time? Does she, just by having the scoring records, all of the scoring records, does that make her the greatest of all time? The fact that people are, contending whether she is the all-time scorer compared to Pete Maravich and even Lynette Woodard. What you cannot argue, regardless of how you feel about any of those things I just mentioned, is that she has moved the conversation. Caitlin Clark has brought in people who have not wanted to, have actively not participated in anything women's basketball related, and she has been an equalizer. We've seen op-ed pieces from families that say how important it has been to be able to connect with their children through Caitlin Clark. And I think that's huge. It's something that is going to cement her legacy, regardless of what the next chapter looks like for her. Sure, it's going to be a tough turnaround as a rookie. You're not guaranteed that she's even going to win a WNBA title. But the wave, Caitlin Clark is the face of this new wave of women's basketball for a lot of people. And I think rightfully so. That being said, I think if you ask Clark, and certainly a lot of people who are in the women's basketball space, we all know that she's not the only face. And some of those faces who she played against, in particular with South Carolina, are going to be playing in the NCAA next year. We got to figure out where Haley Van Lith is going to go. We know that Georgia Amore followed her coach to Kentucky. There's so much to talk about, but I will say that what Caitlin Clark has been able to do is bring more eyes, bring more attention to women's basketball that's been on the rise well before she even entered Iowa. But the fact that she now is turning over some of those fans, and hopefully they'll stick around, and if they know what's good for them, they'll stick around. And I think that will be a part of Caitlin Clark's legacy for sure.
Very well said, Erica. We appreciate you so much talking about Caitlin Clark and South Carolina getting the national championship.
Thank you.
And coming up, we will have more reaction from CBS Sports college basketball analyst BJ Taylor on South Carolina winning their third national title in program history. Caitlin Clark's storied career comes to an end.